kind of thing.
Hey, Anika, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad you can join us in this crazy, crazy world we're living in right now with the coronavirus, and it's affecting everybody, it seems.
Well, I currently don't have anywhere else I can be, but if I had a choice, I would definitely be here.
Right.
Thank you. But yeah, it's a lot more people at home right now. I hate to say it, but it's kind of I'm sort of isolated all the time with what I do, but different circumstances now for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely madness. So hopefully we can bring a little bit of joy and happiness to people who are tuning into this tonight and the next couple of days and all that, and share what you got going on and what you should be doing probably as the baseball season was ramping up here. So let's dive in a little bit. What was it about growing up that baseball, the game of baseball, how did it impact your life, and what got you so interested in it?
Well, initially just spending time with my grandparents. I mean, I was really close with my grandparents, particularly my grandfather, and he was always a big baseball fan. And, there just was, it was always on. If the baseball season was happening, the baseball game was on either on the radio or on TV, usually on the radio. And even, we would go visit my grandmother's sisters on the other side of the bay. This is in the San Francisco Bay Area. And the game would be on in the car, or, it was just sort of the sound of being with my grandparents during the summer. Even before I really knew what was happening in the game, just having the sound of it on, and the excitement. Every once in a while they would, or even if I didn't know why, I just loved it. And then of course later, right around maybe sophomore, junior year in high school, I really started to understand baseball and pay attention. And when I graduated high school, and I moved to San Francisco in 2002. So that was, 2001. But I moved to San Francisco right after September 11th. So that was a weird time to be there. And I, didn't get to catch any ball games at the new ballpark. But the following year was a big year for the Giants. And I was living on my own in San Francisco. And, bleacher tickets were like $10. So I used to just take myself to ball games on any day off that I had. And so it really just it started when I was in childhood, but really just only exponentially grew as far as how much I loved it. I always was drawn more to the story aspect of baseball, all the great stories through baseball history and stories being made, and the sights and sounds of the ball game and the little vignettes of conversation you hear around you in the ballpark. Those were always my favorite parts. And those things really lend themselves well to what I do. So they just kind of seem to go well together.
Who were some of the players that your grandfather or grandparents would talk about as you grew up that, like, I know my grandparents would always talk about the Orioles legends, basically, growing up and telling me about all the things that happened before TV took over. So what were some of the players they talked about?
Oh, gosh. Well, of course, there's Willie Mays. And even, my grandpa used to talk about a lot of his favorite ball players coming even before the Giants, because the San Francisco Seals were, his first love as far as like a big baseball team before Major League came west. So the DiMaggio brothers, even Casey Stengel, ball players who went on to join other franchises with Major League Baseball that didn't end up with the Giants, but Willie Mays for sure. And then Willie McCovey was a big name in the household. He was, I guess maybe in their minds, the first modern day player to sort of capture the imagination of fans that wasn't playing in sort of that golden era of when the Giants came to San Francisco. The Alou brothers were big names, and Orlando Cepeda, I remember my grandpa talked about a lot. And also,
You've named off more names than I could. I even realized it was going to. You said some names that I'm not even familiar with. There was a couple of them. I'm like, wait a minute. And I had to think about it. I'm like, oh, okay. But that's awesome. And it sounds like you said 2001 when you graduated in high school. You're our age. So
Oh, I
You
wish.
had to.
No, I didn't graduate high
No?
school in 2000.
Oh,
Sure,
oh,
I mean,
okay.
yes. When I graduated, shortly after, I guess. I graduated in 98, but I moved to San
Okay.
Francisco in 2001, yeah.
Oh, close enough. But so that means that you got to see some Barry Bonds action too. So that had to be a little exciting. I know the situation kind of taints it a little bit, but it was still he's a great baseball player.
He helped save the game.
Yeah. So
it made going to that ballpark very exciting. I will say that. You know, I was never a huge fan of Barry Bonds, just based on stories and interactions and things like that. But as far as the game goes, you know, I can't even remember the last time I saw a ball go into the water. And I remember when I first started going to that ballpark, it was like it was just littered with kayaks in McCovey Cove because there was always a really good chance a ball was going to go into the water.
Yeah.
And that was so exciting. It just made the whole game experience so much more fun. And there were so many great players on that team. Big Cat Galarraga was a favorite. I loved JT Snow, and Dusty Baker was a great coach then. I'm glad it's fun to see him. I think, total aside, the Astros made a really, really smart choice because, bringing him on, because I think there are very few people who have that solid level of integrity with the game that it's almost like bringing on like Santa's right-hand man or something, like a real honest, good, wholesome, like real baseball figure. I think if they're gonna save anything, he's a good person to do it. So,
but he always kind of reminds me of like the dad. Like he's like the dad in the room everywhere. Always just seems like he like James Earl Jones, like like kind of figure, like just that Morgan Freeman like figure. Like you just kind of look at him and like instantly you just give respect and silence and you make respect and you listen. Like
he's just like a warm Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince.
Yes. Yeah, good point. This is perfect.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to touch on this because as you're explaining the game, it's kind of ironic that you had said that you spent a lot of time listening to the games. It's kind of like the soundtrack of your summer. And for someone as creative as you are with writing and drawing, so you kind of made these stories in your head, which is kind of cool. And you're hearing stories from your grandfather and all that stuff about the game. When did you realize that you were going to be a writer, that you wanted to do that? And when did cartooning and how did that come into play?
Those are all very good questions. And I know that I knew they were coming, but I don't know if I'm fully prepared. Well, okay, so I've drawn my whole life. I mean, for as long as I can remember. And my mom actually recently handed it over to me, what she said was pretty much my first drawing, which is of my grandfather. And I will say it looks quite a bit like my grandfather. So I must have had some level of like ability to observe and put that on paper. It's just a circle with two sticks, but I managed to get the tie in there. So I don't know. But so I've been drawing as long as I can remember, and my drawings always had an element of story to them. So I remember I was always making books or pictures that was like, say I remember this one in particular where I was making a drawing about Christmas. Like, this is the living room on Christmas Eve, but it wasn't just like, oh, the tree and the stockings. It was like, I remember specifically really toiling over what kind of cookies were going to be on the plate. Like, what kind of family is this? Are they an oatmeal raisin family? Are they a chocolate chip family? And like, how many kids are there? The family's not too big because, like, really obsessing over details that nobody was ever going to even notice. So that's always been in me to some degree. The writing part, I've always really enjoyed writing. I loved English classes and I loved writing assignments. Everybody would be like, oh, like there was always a collective groan if you had, if you were in, say, like a history class or a biology class where writing was never a major part of it, and you were assigned a writing thing. It was like, oh, thank God, I don't have to take a numbers test. I can do this. And my grandfather was a writer, and my dad is a very good writer. So I think, my dad was always there. This sounds abusive and horrible, but it was actually great. He always was there with like a red pencil, but it was helpful. He would go through my papers and tell me how this could sound better or whatever. And I think that was always really helpful. It wasn't really until I got to college that I really enjoyed writing, because I realized that I could is particularly history. I could take chunks of information, figure out how they could flow and create, even in my college papers, I was kind of creating narratives or stories that, I don't know, I always love that aspect of it. And writers like, say, Doris Kearns Goodwin, who can take a historical story that might be dry to some people, but turns it into this fascinating, almost like fiction, but it's not. It reads like fiction. But this is the first real thing I've written that wasn't a college paper or an Instagram post. I don't know. I mean, I've contributed little things here and there in the form of articles, but I honestly didn't consider myself a writer. It was just a hobby and a thing I like to do as a supplement to art. I don't even know if I can I still feel weird calling myself a writer, even though there's a published book out there, but I enjoy it and I'm constantly working to improve on it. I think that's another fun part of writing is you could still be good at it. You could have a teacher tell you you're good at it, but there's just like art, like anything, there's always room for improvement. And I think the fun comes in when you're like, oh, I know how to make this better, or now I get the trick. And as you get older, you learn that improving actually requires taking away rather than adding, which is a fun realization. It's kind of like a puzzle. And yeah.
So what kind of baseball artwork were you doing before this book? Was it just, I know you brought up a picture like that you said looked kind of like your grandfather, but what were some of the other stuff you were doing? I mean, you're not doing like self-portrait stuff, but I don't think, but like, so what kind of other drawings were you doing that led you into the amount of artwork that you have for this book that you've created?
Well, it kind of started when, I was doing some work on the conceptual end of the animation industry. So doing some storyboarding and character work. And it's really fun. I enjoy it, but I guess I'm sort of stubborn in that it was less fun working on other people's ideas and other people's stories. It's fun character development is one of those things that's there's a little more freedom because you can sort of use your interpretations of the stories and the characters to give them a physical manifestation. But even still, I just was really struggling with the fact that I was just working day in, day out on other people's stuff. And there's so many things of my own that I wanted to be working on. So I started a side project and I just picked something that I love just so that I could keep my sanity and have fun with it. And baseball season was just starting. And I thought, well, I'm just going to work on a baseball story on the side, just for myself, for fun. And in character development, that requires a lot of research, which is also the fun part. You're researching different elements of this character, maybe in a TV show or, gathering bits and pieces and stitching together a fictional person and their personality. So I just watched a lot of baseball, watched a lot of Cheers because Coach on Cheers is a great character. Yeah. And it was just so much fun. I was having so much fun. I just thought, God, if only I could just do this for my job where it doesn't even feel like a job. I'm watching baseball, I'm listening to baseball, I'm watching my favorite TV shows, and then something is coming out of it. And I was developing this and I just kind of started posting it online because, that's what you do, I guess. And it just kind of took on its own thing. It kind of snowballed into its own thing. And long story short, John Miller, who is the voice of the Giants, he's a really good guy. And he's also a really prolific Instagrammer. And I can't remember if he noticed a drawing, something I had done, but he also grew up reading my grandfather's column. Like I said, my grandpa was a writer. He was a daily columnist in the Bay Area, like a humor life column kind of. And so John Miller had seen it and recognized my name and asked if I was related to Ray Orrock, which is always a really fun question to get when I get it. And I explained that it was my grandfather. And anyway, he invited me to a game. And that turned into its own thing. And I've just had the privilege of drawing at the ballpark in San Francisco and other ballparks around the country. And I just, again, started kind of doing it for fun. But then I used that as inspiration for other illustrations. And then they started selling, or I do drawings in the ballpark and was selling those online. Still do when there's actually baseball happening.
Right.
I just this book came about in that I was compiling all of those drawings together for a book, like just a little self-published book of my illustration work, baseball illustration work, and just kind of coming to the realization that in all of the drawings I had, this huge stack of drawings, there were no drawings of women or women's stories in baseball. And I just decided I wanted to explore that a little bit more, and I found them. And I found some really great ones, and just decided to pick one, even though there's a multitude of stories within the story of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. There are so many incredible stories to tell. And it's almost overwhelming, and I would love to tell more, but I had to pick one and start with one, and this is the one that I did, and I'm glad I did. It was really fun.
So tell, for our listeners who don't know already, give us the name.
Hold on 1 second though, real quick. I got to bring this up before I forget about it, before it gets lost. So John Miller, former voice of our hometown Baltimore Orioles.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
His voice is iconic to me in my childhood growing up, riding home, listening to games in the car, and him. So I just had to bring it up because our Orioles have been bad. John Miller left a long, long time ago, and I remember when he left. It was heartbreaking, and it's so funny that you have that connection, and that's kind of where this came from to me, at least, because I'm kind of his voice is the one I remember growing up as a kid.
Wow.
Sorry.
Don't be. And I can only imagine the heartbreak, because I swear to God, if he ever leaves the Giants, I will just have to be a fan of a new team. I mean, he came on as the voice when I was, I want to say 17. So, I grew up.
Yeah.
What's that?
It was like mid 90s, right? Like 95 or something, like 96, 94, maybe.
I don't know.
It was somewhere in
Baltimore.
Yeah, because I remember being a kid thinking, like, man, this guy on the radio doesn't sound like the guy on the radio that I used to hear all the time. Because I wasn't like old enough to really read news clip. I mean, I remember, but I don't remember like the article being broken or anything, like big story. But I just remember like turning a game on and it was a whole different sound, or listening to a game on the way home from a baseball game that I played in, and I was like, this doesn't sound like the same guy. That me and my dad talked about it and all of that. So
he's like, well, son, sometimes
when Barry Bonds was on that run and they would do nationally televised games, John Miller would be the voice of those games and all of that. So just kind of.
Oh, that's pretty ironic.
Sorry to get off track, but it just to me it was
okay.
Like, wow, he's a legend though. I mean, really in a way.
Well, it's funny. I didn't even realize that. So you just taught me something. So
what's funny is, I'm sorry to even take this farther off track, but one of the things that I love about baseball being on the radio is that I can have it on while I work and while I draw, and it's like having the two experiences, and it sort of influences my work and vice versa. And then if there isn't baseball on, I have I think everybody kind of has their go-to TV shows that they like to have on, where they've seen every episode, so they don't really have to watch, but it's still, like something like Seinfeld. So Cheers is one of those for me. And I, several years ago, before I ever even met Mr. Miller, I had Cheers on in the background, and all of a sudden out of nowhere, I was like, wait a minute. And I thought something had gone wrong with the TV or my computer, because I heard his voice all of a sudden, and I thought there was a game on, but he was calling the Red Sox game on the episode of Cheers. Like, so Carla was watching the game while he was calling it, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know. I hadn't known that he had called for the Red Sox until watching that.
That's the one with the lucky beer cap, right? When that episode?
Oh, is it? It might be.
I think Sam gave the pitcher his lucky beer cap, and he was winning the game. That's probably
right.
Yeah, I just watched that recently.
This is the beauty of podcasting.
Yeah,
we can just talk about whatever we want at all, and we can go as far off the rails as we want. It's perfect. But it's life. It's
no corporate sponsors hovering over you.
No, absolutely not. But
here's Dan to get us back on track.
No, it's okay. Hello, everyone. So for the people that don't know what your book is called and what it's about, can you give us the title of the book and then a brief synopsis of what it's about?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to be as brief as possible. Well, the title is The Incredible Women of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. It's a mouthful. There you go. There it is. And it is essentially about, World War II came around, and there was sort of this hovering question as to whether or not baseball would actually happen, because in World War I, which was not far behind World War II, it had been sort of deemed non-essential, and all able-bodied people needed, able-bodied men needed to either be out on the front lines or doing something war-related. And so with it sort of coming about again, the commissioner of baseball wrote to Franklin Roosevelt asking his thoughts, and he basically said, I think we need to keep baseball going. It lifts morale. It's a necessary respite for people working longer hours in factories. But if these men are able-bodied and able to go off to fight, that needs to happen. So even though baseball continued, there was just this severe shortage of not only players, but then also gas rationing was on. People were spending so much more time working in factories, they couldn't really get to games. So baseball was still suffering, and there was potential for it to sort of crash as a business. Minor league baseball, I think, pretty much stopped. But so Wrigley just had this idea. I think it was inspired. I think it was also a business decision to sort of keep some revenue generating. He formed a women's league. It was initially meant to be a women's softball league, but it ended up being a women's baseball league, and it ended up also being a lot more popular than was anticipated, I think, and more successful. So these women played from 1943 until 1954, and they had some incredible stories and experiences, and there's some really interesting articles in the book. I've sort of stitched together newspaper and periodical articles, newsreel quotes from newsreels, and then stories from these women who actually played baseball in the league, and just kind of stitched them together into a story, and I illustrated it. So that's what it is, I guess. Yeah.
So we grew up with a movie that kind of was symbolic to this. It's probably one of the iconic baseball movies ever, let alone in our lifetimes. If you're born in the 80s, this is one of those movies that, you kind of just loved and always do love, and you watch it now with your kids and all of that. But, if it weren't for that movie, a majority of people even back then didn't know this was happening. And then this movie brought, insight into what was going on. What was it that you learned through that? And if you want to bring up the movie, I mean, you can, but hopefully most people wouldn't understand a women's baseball league movie. What we're talking about is listen to this. But what was it about, you're doing your research that you learned outside of what the movie probably portrayed in it?
Oh, I learned so much. And the more I learned, the more I felt a sense of purpose. This book that I've just done is not the only book available on the topic. It's the only one like it, I guess. But there are other women who've done a great amount of research, and their research was very helpful to me. But also just resourcing the players, and also original source documents and archives and all of that. I just felt the more that I learned, the more excited I was to be doing the book, because of how different it really is from the movie. The movie is not only a great movie, but it was completely necessary and imperative in bringing these women's stories to the consciousness of the country and the world. The women themselves didn't talk about their days playing in the league really until the movie came out. I think it was part that they didn't really think of it as being anything tremendously significant. It was just this thing they did, and they loved doing it, and they got paid to play baseball, and it was great. And then it ended, and they kind of had to move on with their lives. But also they had a really difficult time convincing anyone, and it's really tiresome to convince somebody that you played baseball. And to this day, it's amazing to me that women who play baseball, one of my favorite quotes in the book came from Pepper Pear Davis, who says you can look them right in the eye and say baseball, and they'll look you right back and say softball. As if, and Rhea Butcher, who I just had the pleasure of talking with on her podcast recently, has a great comedy bit about that. And she's like, they really think we're so stupid that we don't know what sport we play. Like, we just forgot. Oh, wait, no, you're right. I play softball. I'm sorry. Like, as if you don't know. So, you know, this movie it brought that. I mean, suddenly people knew, and it was wonderful. And then not only did people suddenly know, but it gave these women who experienced it the freedom, and not only the freedom to talk about it, but then they were celebrated, and people wanted to hear about it, and they had the opportunity to talk about it, and they were suddenly being asked to come to schools and museums and, you know, all these places to talk about it. I mean, they expressed it to me in so many ways, but I can only imagine what that did for the quality of life for some of these women, financially, but just how fun to be recognized and be able to talk about what a lot of them call the best years of their lives. So, you know, in that respect, it's completely valuable in so many ways. There were some things that, you know, I guess why would you put in a movie? Just kind of details that I think are so fascinating, but obviously they can't really fit into that format. But some of the larger things that really struck me in watching it again after doing all this research, one of the biggest ones was that the movie kind of makes it look like it just was this sort of magical season of baseball during World War II. And then it was like, oh, well, the boys are coming home. It's done. You know, we had this fun. And it went for 11 years, and it was successful, just as successful, if not more so, the years coming out of the war than during it. And also, you know, I mean, they got to do some things for Hollywood, but coaches were actually coaches. They treated the women like actual ball players. The woman who, oh gosh, what's her name? The one who cries, and Tom is like in her, you know, Doris, thank you. I mean, she never would have made the cut. Like, you know, these women that played were like real ball players. They certainly wouldn't have missed the cutoff man, you know? So, things like that. And, you know, the chaperones were really valuable and instrumental in these women being allowed to leave home and go travel. So, you know, they weren't these sort of like fuddy-duddy, you know, they never poisoned them, for God's sakes, you know. So, you know, little things like that are sort of understandable. They kind of have to make it a little more fun, but yeah, I learned a lot.
Well, I tell you what, you know, especially if for those who are with like most of the country who are in quarantine in this unfortunate situation we got going on in our country, I read that this is in one day. I read your book from front to back, every single part.
Wow.
Yeah,
I don't even know if I've done that.
And then I watched A League of Their Own just an hour afterwards with my wife and kids. And what was so cool is, one, the first thing I thought of is like, wait a minute, why is this movie only one season? And that was the one thing I thought about. But as I'm reading it, I'm like, I know, like, there's little parts in this movie when they're talking about the steak dinner, when they're talking about you know, the girls have to look pretty and they have to look like ladies. They can't be masculine. Like, these are all things that I learned from your book that got even deeper. And my wife thought I was like this historian telling her about all these things. When the African-American woman threw the ball in, I thought of, what was it, Mamie Johnson?
Peanut,
who was, you know, she tried to play, and there wasn't a rule about African-American women playing in the league. So then they put one in and said, you're not allowed to play. So she had to play on an all-male team on the Negro Leagues. And it was just like, I'm learning all this stuff from your book, and I'm like, this is so cool. Like, it's all coming together. And I can see, you know, they were playing at Wrigley Field, even though it was Harvey Field. And you know, and the one thing that I learned the most was, this could have gone on for a long time. Like, this could still be the women's professional league could have gotten bigger and bigger. But when it was sold off to the different business owners, they were looking at it more as, this is a fun thing to manage a girls team, not this is a profitable, marketable, something that could be even bigger. And that's what just kind of blew my mind. And I'm like, man, this could have been amazing. So anybody listening right now, get this book. You'll learn so much. It is a history lesson. It's fantastic.
And it's not
Well,
just a
thanks.
book. Look at this incredible work that's inside of it.
Yeah, and the way you do it is you talk about a situation. Just for people listening, she talks about a certain scenario in this league, and then it's quotes and pictures from the actual players, and it's hilarious and it's entertaining. It's kind of sad in a couple spots, but it's awesome. I love it.
Well, thanks. And I love that thank you for sharing that whole experience and doing it that way, because I was actually thinking, because I had a really fun conversation with, I don't know if you know Kyle of Big Screen Sports podcast, but it's a movie. It's about sports movies. And so I obviously had to go back and watch A League of Their Own again. And I thought I had it down. I was like, oh, I don't need to watch again, but maybe I will just in case. And I couldn't believe how much I didn't remember, but also just the parallels is like, well, now that I know these things, it wasn't so much me being like, no, that's not right. No, it was more supplemental. Like, I feel like I kind of got more out of, I got more enjoyment out of the movie knowing what I had known, or
you feel basically you fill in the blanks.
And I think it's a really fun way for people to do it, especially if you have kids. I mean, if you've got kids at home and you're stuck at home right now, I think it would be a fun way to do both. Like you're saying, I don't know if it matters particularly what order or not, but yeah, it is a shame too that it didn't continue. Like you said, it's ironic to me that it is like the most behind as far as women's sports goes, when it was actually, it could have been like the very first professional women's league of like a professional sport. It could be almost parallel with like men's baseball right now if it had kept going. It could just be as normal as anything, but then it stopped and now it's like so far behind anything else. I think that's so interesting.
Let's stay there. I mean, me and Dan are both dads of 11, about to be 12-year-old daughters. I mean, throwing balls, baseballs, whatever they got. I think we both probably started with a baseball in our daughter's hands because that's what we had. And you talk about this, and it's still to this point, to this day. One thing about your book, the women's rights and how this affected like their working roles, women in sports, and some of those that they were dealing with then are still true to this day. And I mean, you do see some of the exposure from like ESPN with women's college softball, but there still really isn't much for a women's professional league. I mean, heck, even the Olympics now are in jeopardy for women's softball. That's probably the crown jewel of their sports career for sure. But can you just talk a little bit about, maybe some of the struggles that they dealt with in that they helped bring to the forefront that maybe are still happening, all these years later? I mean, 60, 70 years later, in women in sports. We lost her.
Oh, lost her. See if we can get her back here.
Give us 1 second.
Boom, boom, boom.
This is live. This is what happens when you're live. Things like this happen.
Yeah.
But while we're waiting for her to jump back, there she is.
All right, there we go.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yep. We got you.
Thank you. Oh no. Oh no.
Are you there? Can you hear us?
Okay, there.
Okay,
sorry.
Cool.
No, what I was saying, I don't know if you got the question or not, but what I was saying was that, some of the struggles these women dealt with in sports, and bringing things to the forefront are some of the same things that women are dealing with now in sports. And, like you said, if this league would have kept going, who knows where it could have been. And then now you look at like women's professional softball that's still struggling. Women's soccer, women's basketball, all the professional leagues are still struggling. They're starting to get more and more support from, like the NBA and men's soccer, and Major League Baseball is supporting women's softball this summer. But can you talk a little bit maybe about some of that stuff that maybe you learned, or that you still see similar things happening from that era to this era?
Yeah, well, I mean, sadly, a lot of similarities, but I will say, even from the time I was writing the manuscript for this book until now, it's amazing some of the things that I've seen and how it's catching on. And I think knowing about things like this, I guess, there was sort of not a sense of urgency, but initially when I was kind of feeling this sense of urgency to get this book out, it was because a lot of these women who played, I was getting obituary notices in my email like twice a month, and I was like, God, I want to not only want to be able to talk to a lot of these women, but have them, share this with them and have them be able to see it and share it with their families. And but what was interesting is that it became, as I was writing it, I'm embarrassed to say I didn't even know about the women's national team, USA baseball, or the Women's World Cup. And it just so happened to be happening in the US that as I was writing this. And I came across an article and I, again, embarrassed to say it hadn't even occurred to me to write anything resembling an afterword. But in coming across an article where they were interviewing a woman who played for Team USA, she said, she had a quote that was almost verbatim that quote that I mentioned earlier from Pepper Pear, that was something like, I can say baseball and they'll say softball. And I say, no, I play baseball. And they're like, you mean softball? Like, as if you don't know. And it was, and she said, it's like, it's comical sometimes, but you just get so tired of it that it's like, she said, sometimes I'll just throw my hands up and be like, yeah, whatever, and it's like, oh my God, no, but also, whoa, I'm looking at this piece of paper here and this piece of paper here, and they're almost verbatim. I was like, this is so bizarre. It's like it's like time never happened. And that prompted a lot of curiosity. And that led to me wanting to take this further, because this legacy is amazing as a standalone thing, but the purpose that it can serve moving forward is that there are still so many people who don't know this happened. The movie came out over 25 years ago, and it's a classic, and a lot of people know it, and a lot of young girls will see it because their parents are now our age. But I spoke with a woman who contributed to the afterword, this young woman by the name of Beth, who plays baseball now, and she never knew the league existed until she met a couple of former players at a Baseball for All event when she was in her teens. And she said, I had always hoped for this possibility of something like an all women's league, thinking it was so far out that I may never see it in my lifetime, or at least in my playing years. And then suddenly I'm told it actually did happen and it actually did exist, and I don't know how much that can change as far as logistics or bureaucratic things or funding or money, but I think there is a certain amount of empowerment in knowing that something is possible because it's already happened, and knowing that, well, if it's already happened, particularly at a time when it was far less likely to happen, right, then why can't we make it happen now? And I think that kind of lights a fire, or at least stokes some motivation or hope, and I think it's a good time for that right now. And just as I said, just even between then and now, the amount of people joining in Baseball for All, the amount of young girls teams, we just saw now the first two major league hitting coaches, women that have been hired by major league teams. It's not to say like, okay, we're there, but just to even see these things happening is fundamentally really a big deal, because then people will take it seriously, and you get organizations like Major League Baseball who are finally taking it seriously and getting on board. And that's what it requires now. I mean, unfortunately now, I don't know if it's any different than before, but money makes a big difference. And who says it's legitimate makes a big difference. You can have 1,000 people over here saying this is real, but then you get one person over here who agrees, and suddenly it's a real thing. And it's unfortunate, but not, if you can get enough people on board to prove that it's a legitimate sport, which obviously it is, then there you have it. And I think possibilities are endless.
It was kind of eerie, because reading the book and then watching the movie, just talking about at that time with, the rations that were going on, and, the money was tight for people. Women had to go out and work, and, people were kind of frantic, and everything was different. Everything was changing. Well, here I am sitting at home. I don't have any sports to watch. So I'm just flipping through the channel. I literally go to my remote and say sports. And whatever they have on, whether it's a replay of an Orioles game back in 1996, or I watched Curling Night in America for the first time. I learned the game of curling.
Wow.
Like you want to watch something new. What a better time than when sports can finally come up to because people are watching sports and things they've never watched before right now. I'm not the only person that's crazy watching. Like I watched plane racing today. It was actually speed plane racing. They're flying through little
The Red Bull racing.
Whoa.
yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
nuts.
I'm watching that and it's insane. And I actually was watching drag racing for the first time. I was like, all right, whatever. But hey, when we get sports back, bring back that. Let's play women's baseball more than every other year because right now the World Cup's every other year, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so like it would be a perfect time. Why not? And we got all the access to the public as we possibly can with YouTube. It could be a YouTube thing,
So stream
whatever.
it anywhere you want, right?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. Well,
but-
and it's ironic because, that's exactly what happened then is it was sort
Yeah.
of like, okay, well, we don't really have baseball as we know it. What can we do? All right, sure. We'll watch women play. There was kind
Right.
of a novelty thing at first, as you'll see in the book. There's a lot of articles that are, I as the publisher described in their review or their description, wince-worthy, which they are. There were some things I came across where I was like, wow. Okay.
Oh, the one was we came for the legs and stayed for the game.
Yeah.
Like they were good.
Yeah.
They came for the legs. Yeah, it was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
They came for the legs and then realized that they were good players and they were like, okay, we'll stick around for this. It's like, what?
I think that was a really common thing, and a lot of players described it that way. That in the very beginning, it was sort of like, "Oh, hey, honey, your husband let you out. Oh, look how cute, and these cute little pastel frocks, and oh, look how cute, they can swing a bat, and But then it was like, oh, damn, okay, and they really proved themselves, and then it became a successful. People attended these games. They got out of work. They became kind of hometown heroes. They were a big deal. They were treated like, hometown royalty and never had to pay for a breakfast or whatever, that sort of thing. To go from a novelty to a star, a hometown star or an idol that these kids were looking up to or that women identified with and looked up to in such a short amount of time is so incredible. But nobody wishes World War II happened. Nobody's wishing that this was happening.
Right.
And I wouldn't even ever dare as to go so far as to say it's a good thing. But the inspiring thing is knowing that we have always been capable of planting seeds in these moments that grow into good things. And good things do come out of necessity because unfortunately maybe we're too lazy or distracted to just do it voluntarily, whatever these things are that need to happen. But like you're saying, I think it's a great time for something like this to even take a leap because of what we're dealing with right now.
Before we get to our last, few questions here as we wind down, was there anything that you wanted to highlight and bring up that maybe we've been all over the place a little bit, but is there anything about the book that maybe you want to touch on that we haven't talked about just yet, or if you want to tease a part of it to the audience?
Oh gosh. I think we've covered a lot of what's it's I feel like a jerk. It's hard for me to say, but it's only because I've been so completely immersed in it that I forget to look at it from an outside perspective of like, what am I missing? I've covered everything. It's like, well, I've covered everything in my head for the last 3 years. No, I think the biggest thing for me is letting people know or reminding people that, I did some writing, but the majority of this book is in these women's words. And I didn't necessarily mean to do it on the outset, but one thing that I am proud of about this book is that you can pick it up and open up to any spot in the book. It doesn't have to read like a beginning to end. There is a beginning and there is sort of an end that leads into another beginning, but the stories are built around stories that I was able to gather from these women or that were available through other means if they have already passed on or were unable to speak. But I think that's the best part because I can't make up anything better than how these women have presented their own experiences. and I can't use words better than the words they used. So I think you get the full essence of the spirit of the league through their words. And I just want to make sure people know that, because it's not just my boring filtered idea of the league.
Right.
It comes from them. I just drew
Well,
it.
It's
Very creatively.
It's beautifully done, the way it's completely
Thank you.
laid out. Like you said, even though you're using quotes from these women, you didn't write all of it. The way you put it in there and the way you found these quotes and kind of lined them up, and it literally flows on the page, and it's beautiful the way it's done. And I commend you. It's fantastic. So I think everybody should
I appreciate that.
definitely. Yeah, no problem. Everybody should pick up this book for sure. If you could tell your younger self anything, if you can go back in time and tell your younger self anything, what would it be?
Stop messing around with all the other stuff and just do the thing you love doing.
Hey, there we go.
There's this sort of this idea that you got to have a backup plan for everything, and
Right.
you got to do a thing that can turn into a real job. You got to you got to put the safety net first and then do the thing you love. And one thing I never realized was, like, if you just do the thing you love, however obscure, actually the more obscure, the better.
Right.
And just go all out with that, invest, because like you're your greatest product if you've got these creative ideas. And if you invest in them, your investment will grow. But if you're like investing in all these other things, those things are going to grow first. So I wish I would have known that a little sooner, but I'm grateful I learned it all.
It took us a while to get a podcast going, so we completely understand. This is our creative outlet. No, what would be some of your goals you'd like to, obviously I think the baseball season's probably put you a little backtrack on where you want to be with this book, and probably promoting it to the public a little bit. But short of that, what would be some of your goals in the next 3 to 5 years?
Oh, man. Well, I'm not entirely sure I want to jump into another book yet. I have a couple of different ideas, but maybe nothing like this. I will say, okay, I love doing cartooning. I love the single panel format, but I think what I would really love is more of this, but in a more digestible daily or weekly format. So I don't know if you're familiar with Roger Angel and the writings he did for New Yorker magazine, but I would love to find an outlet where I can be doing baseball writing, whether it's baseball history or in the field somewhere, and creating enjoyable pieces for people to read that are not focused on the business or the numbers of the sport, but the sort of nostalgic, enjoyable, ethereal part of the sport. And I would love to either provide cartoons or illustrations, something like that. So if there's a magazine out there, New Yorker.
Now, one thing that I looked at this book and I've thought about things, and now I hear you say that, is, man, I would love to see you do for like The Athletic, that's so popular now, or even take ESPN, the magazine, Sports Illustrated, whatever. But The Athletic is probably the most digital, it's all over the internet. And do like when Muncie hit that ball into the water and he told him to go pick it up out of the ocean. Like, if you would be able to do your style of drawing and have somebody like that publish it with some of these things that happen in the game, like, I think it would be incredible in this day and age, honestly, because it's kind of like the cartoon section of a newspaper is a long lost art from our childhood. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that, like, if somebody just gave you the chance, it could be an incredible match made in heaven in this different world that we live in, that you don't see things like this anymore.
Yeah, and your style is, I think your style, like even like a This Week in History and baseball history, like that would be awesome. Like The Catch from Willie Mays, like all of that.
I would love to do something like that.
That would be awesome. I'd read it.
Yes.
So
well,
but just my 2 cents that I would throw in there.
I would give that. I would say that's like closer to 5 cents. That's a good one. Well, baseball cartooning in general used to be a thing. There used to always be like a bit like Willard Mullins. There always used to be a big baseball cartoon about what was going on, and cartoons in general have sort of disappeared. But it could happen again. It happened once before. Why can't it happen again? Sticking with the theme.
Don't tell these kids, they got Disney Plus now. The cartoons are.
Oh yeah.
Oh man. So, Anika, what if you could recommend anyone? Because we love having people on the show with awesome stories, whether they played, whether they coached, whether they are a writer and an artist. We've also had another artist on here as well.
Oh,
Who would you recommend that we bring on the show to bring value to our listeners?
well, I think any of the women that were included in the afterword of this book, I don't know if you've had on, I think Malika Underwood, who plays for Team USA, would be amazing. She's got some great stories, and she was the player interviewed for that article I was telling you about. Justine Siegel, who founded Baseball for All, and she coaches, and she's just a tremendous force behind promoting girls baseball and women's baseball. And Isla Borders is another one that I had the pleasure of interviewing for the book. And also, who would be really fun too is if you can get a former All-American Girls League player or two. I know Shirley Berkovich and Maybelle Blair are like the dynamic duo of promoting girls baseball, and they're a riot and, for lack of a less ancient word, a hoot. So I think they would be really fun. Another person who would be really insightful is my counsel, Donna Cohen. She is an advocate. She's a lawyer. She does a lot of work for women in baseball, artists. She helped found the first women's fantasy camp through the Red Sox, and she's got a lot of insight and a lot of hands in different projects.
Nice. That's great. That's I'm not gonna lie, the women in the back of the book, I Googled a few of them as I was reading because I wanted to see it. And actually I watched some YouTube videos from some games. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah. They're all very insightful, and they have a lot to offer a conversation that, you guys could have a good conversation.
Awesome. Hopefully you can help us connect maybe with a few. No, where can people find you online, your website? Where can they buy the book at? And is there any places that hopefully in the future people would be able to catch up, like a book signing or stadium tour or anything like that maybe you have hopefully planned when life gets back to normal?
Gosh, I hope so. My whole hope for this was like selfishly turning it into a ballpark tour, and
Yeah, it would be perfect.
yeah, I know that would be amazing. I'd still be open to it next year. Well, let's see. Online, well, I'm on all social media channels, but the book can be purchased anywhere where books are sold. But I am selling signed copies on my website, which is anikaorrock.com, and then also gift packs that include prints featuring illustrations from the book that can come with it. But also on my website, if you click on the link on the menu for the book, it will give you a choice of, you can either purchase the signed copy here with me, or then there's an option for another page that's full of links. You can click on any one of the links to choose where you want to buy it from. If you want to buy it from your local independent bookstore, there's IndieBound. And I know a lot of local independent bookstores are closed right now, but I do know that a lot of independent bookstores are offering either online sales, or you can purchase something over the phone and they'll bring it out to your car, which I think is kind of a cool feature. So I still recommend your local independent bookstore if possible, but otherwise, yeah, through my website. And then what was the other question you asked? Oh, if I'm going to be anywhere. Well, yeah, a lot of events have been canceled, but as far as I know, so long as baseball resumes, they're saying it looks like maybe June or July. I will be at Yankee Stadium on August 18th. Doing a signing. That signing is on the suite level, but I'll be throwing out the first pitch, so that'll be fun.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Who are they playing?
I believe they're playing the Rays.
Okay.
No.
Right.
I had a choice between the Rays or the Blue Jays, but really it just came down to I had to choose Tuesday for other reasons. So I'll be in New York City for a while, though, and we're what we were doing when this was going to be happening in May was scheduling some other events and signings in New York City around that time. So hopefully we can make the same thing happen in August. So far, that's the only thing I know about right now that isn't completely up in the air, but we'll see. But there is also an events tab on my website, and I'll be keeping that updated with upcoming events. So
Excellent. That's awesome. Well, we will keep our fingers crossed for you. Absolutely.
Thank you.
You deserve this. It's fantastic.
And April was great to work with in communicating to get this set up. So if you talk to April, tell her we said thank you. We appreciate her, and we appreciate the copy of the book.
And sorry it took so long.
Awesome.
We had so much going on because we were planning our season to be starting here soon, and now it's not. So, but yeah, she was great. I do have one more question for you. One of my favorite questions. We ask this to everybody. If you had one at bat in a women's professional baseball game, what song would you choose as your walk-up song to the plate?
Oh, thank God. I thought you were going to ask, like, where would you hit it? I'd be like, the ground. No. Well, I think the response I gave was the first one that came to mind, which would be, now, I don't know how many people are going to be old enough to know what this song is, but it's a song called Rumble by Link Ray.
Nice.
I'm not really sure why, except for it's just a totally badass song. And it's not like, it's pretty slow moving, but I feel like you could get like a good walk on with the walk on, you know? And also it's kind of an unsuspecting song. It started riots. It was like a really big deal when it happened. And I think that's so cool because it's instrumental. It wasn't like horrible lyrics started riots. It was just this badass rock and roll song.
So you're going to get up that and start riots. That's what you're...
That's kind of what I'm saying.
Nice. No, that's excellent. Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you coming on, and